Hey everyone, so today I'm talking about Canon's two cheapest lens options available for the RF mount, and that is first of all the RF 50mm f1.8 STM, which is the cheapest lens available for RF and also tends to be the most popular optic on really any kind of mount, and that's up against the RF 16mm f2.8 STM, which is right now the cheapest ultra wide and also the newest prime lens for Canon's RF mount. And the thing about these lenses is, as far as physical design of the lenses, they have a whole lot in common, but optically they have a world of differences. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses of each of these lenses, and then about which lens might be right for whom. Alright, so as far as build quality and handling between these two lenses goes, it's really easy because they both have the exact same housing design. And both of these are made primarily of the tough plastic that we've seen in all of the RF lenses, which helps to keep these two lenses really light. They do both have a metal lens mount, which is going to be a good thing in helping with durability of this lens when you're taking it on and off with both of the lenses. But neither of these lenses have weather sealing, neither one comes with a lens hood, but they are both very small and pair with these mirrorless camera bodies really well to make a compact setup. But these two lenses are actually tied for being the smallest lens option for RF cameras, and a couple things that come along with that is, first of all, there's only one ring on each of the camera and one switch, and that switch allows you to decide whether you want that ring to be either a control ring that you can map custom settings to control your ISO or shutter speed or aperture or what have you, or if you want it to be the focus ring. And the problem with that, for me at least, is that there's no dedicated switch to turn your camera into manual focus mode. You have to go into the menu with both of these lenses and choose manual focus and also have the switch set to focus in order to be able to manual focus with either of these lenses. So they are very bare bones, but again, that does allow them to be very compact. Now, when it comes to photography, these are very different focal lengths. So the 50mm I think is a very versatile focal length when it comes to photography. You can get some compression in your photos, but if you have enough room, you can also step back and get a decent amount of environment in your shots. And this 50mm lens also has a pretty good close focus distance at 30 centimeters or just under 1 foot. And with that, combined with the f1.8 maximum aperture and the compression that you get at 50mm, you can get some pretty decent blurry backgrounds out of this lens, even if you're a little bit further back. Now the 16mm lens, on the other hand, is not a super versatile focal length on a full frame camera. It is a great option for capturing a lot of your environment, but it can be difficult for composing shots if you're not in a big outdoor open space. It does have about a 108-degree field of view, which means it can be kind of hard to be selective about what you keep in frame. Now, bokeh with a 16mm lens is definitely a different story because with ultra wide, you really don't get a lot of compression at all. And also f2.8 isn't the fastest maximum aperture for a prime lens. But I will say that if you're closer up on your subject and have it separated from your background, and the close focusing distance on this is about 0.43 feet or 0.13 meters, which is only about 0.26 times magnification. But if you are close up on your subject and at f2.8, you can get some blurry background in your photo, but as you get further from your subject, even if you're wide open on that lens, you're not going to get a very shallow depth of field here. Autofocus performance on both of these lenses is fast and accurate. I really have never had any problems with the autofocus from either lens with focus hunting or anything like that. When we talk about bringing these photos into post, if you're shooting raw, so for the 50mm, Adobe has just recently released the lens correction profiles for the 50mm lens, and that's a good thing, but to be fair, it took a year, and that's a pretty long time before releasing lens profile corrections. But for the 50mm, it wasn't a huge deal because it didn't need a ton of lens correction in order to have at least a usable image. With the 16mm lens, that is a different story, and the correction profile for this lens is not available in Adobe Lightroom or other editing softwares right now outside of Canon's proprietary software, which is free. And this is more problematic for the 16mm lens than it was for the 50mm, because the 16mm lens does need a lot of correction, and so much so that in camera, you aren't even able to turn the lens correction profile off. The problem is that only applies to when you're shooting JPEGs. When you're shooting RAW, the lens correction profile doesn't get automatically applied to your files, so when you bring it into your editor, those lens corrections aren't there. And that is, again, problematic with the 16mm lens because, first of all, you have pretty heavy distortion from this lens, and this lens was advertised as being a rectilinear lens, but with the uncorrected images it actually is pretty close to being almost a fisheye lens, because the lens actually doesn't even cover the full sensor. Uncorrected, you're going to have completely dark corners where the image isn't even being projected into the corners of the camera. So again, if it takes as long for the lens correction profiles to get to Lightroom and other editing softwares as it did with the 50mm lens, that could be much more problematic if you're trying to work with the 16mm lens, because it definitely needs that lens correction profile to be added in order to at least use your image as shot. Now you can crop in a little bit and get past those dark corners that you get from the image not covering the full sensor width, but you are still going to have to deal with the distortion that you get from this lens, because that's not going to be corrected. Once the lens correction profile comes out, it's going to stretch those images. And after I saw the first few RAW files and noticed that that was happening, I did end up shooting RAW plus JPEG so that I can show you what the JPEGs look like with that lens correction profile applied versus the RAW files without the lens corrections. As far as image quality goes, the 50mm lens is known for its good image quality for price ratio, and you get good color reproduction from this lens. You get really good sharpness for the price point. Now, that's across the frame, but it is not going to be as sharp as some of the more expensive RF lenses that are really impressive with how sharp they are. However, I will say for most cases, it's plenty sharp from this lens. And again, considering the price point, I think this is really good image quality that you get. Now for the 16mm lens, image quality needs a little bit of context here, because for a budget ultra wide lens, it's not bad, but it's definitely not as good of image quality as you are going to get from the 50mm lens. Now color reproduction is good and sharpness is good even wide open in the center, but as you move into the corners away from the center, the sharpness does fall off. But again, that's definitely something that you would expect from a budget ultra wide lens. Correction profiles are very necessary for this lens in order to get a usable image most of the time, and again, we don't have those yet, so that could be problematic. So like I said, these lenses are very different and for very different uses. The 50mm lens is a super versatile lens, and you can shoot almost anything with the 50mm lens, even if it's not necessarily the best choice for what you might be shooting. The 16mm lens, on the other hand, is a very niche type of application. And I will say that it gives a very unique look to photos. 16mm is not something that everybody's used to seeing constantly, versus 50mm is something that you do tend to see pretty often. We are going to get decreasing image quality as we move from the center to the corners of the 16mm lens, but I do think it is a still usable lens. Of course, there is then also the fact that the 16mm lens is about 50% more expensive than the 50mm lens. So when it comes to video, I really don't think that either of these lenses were designed as dedicated video lenses, although they both have good autofocus performance and they both have pretty good image quality as well. With the 16mm, you are going to get noticeable distortion, but that's just part of what you get with an ultra wide lens. And when we're shooting in video with a 16mm lens, you don't have to worry about getting those dark corners like you do in photo because of the 16:9 or smaller cutout of the sensor that you're going to be using in video. Those aren't going to show up in your image. And again, at these focal lengths, these lenses are very different for very different uses. The 16mm is going to show a ton of your environment and going to help you get great establishing shots and things like that. The 50mm, on the other hand, is going to give you that little bit of compression in your shot and going to help you separate your subject from the background. Now, when you're hand holding for video, neither of these lenses have optical image stabilization, but the 50mm actually works really well with the in-body image stabilization of the newer cameras. The 16mm lens, on the other hand, does not work well with the in-body image stabilization on those newer cameras. Ultra-wide lenses with this Canon in-body image stabilization get a really intense jello effect, and it just doesn't look good at all. I will say though that at 16mm handheld on full frame, because of the super wide field of view, micro jitters are not going to be as prominent. So a lot of times you might actually be able to get away with filming handheld at 16mm if you can film relatively stably and just completely switching off image stabilization. The 16mm I think is an interesting option for things like vlogging and filming yourself despite the issues with image stabilization with this lens. And I also think it's probably going to be an interesting option for things like shooting action sports. You get a really unique field of view from this lens, and it's going to be great, like I said, for those establishing shots, environmental shots. And I think it's going to work really well for shots where you are having the camera locked off on a tripod. For handheld stationary shots, it'll probably still do okay. For shots where you're doing a lot of hand movements and panning, it's probably not going to be your best bet. The 50mm, on the other hand, is not a wide focal length, so micro jitters from hand holding shots will be more prominent. However, the 50mm does work well with in-body image stabilization on the cameras that have that available, and with that IBIS, I think you can pretty easily do handheld movements with the 50mm lens. And for the cameras, the R and the RP, that don't have the in-body image stabilization, the digital image stabilization works pretty well in a lot of situations as well. This 50mm focal length is going to be better for getting your close and your detail shots, and you can though also get some amount of environment in the shots with the 50mm if you have enough room. It's not going to be the best for filming yourself, definitely not handheld. If you do have plenty of space and you can set it on a tripod and back that tripod pretty far away from you, then you might be able to use it for filming yourself in a sit-down situation like this. But overall, I do think it's going to be the more versatile option for video shooters. So which lens is for whom? And actually, this is a pretty easy question with these two lenses. So first of all, you have the 50mm, and the 50mm, again, very versatile focal length, especially for photos. You can shoot almost anything with this, even if it's not necessarily the best option for everything. It's a little bit less versatile, but still usable and relatively versatile if you're a video shooter. And because of the price and the size and weight of this lens, I really think it's a good option for almost everybody. The 16mm lens, on the other hand, is a very cool lens, and it is awesome to have an ultra wide lens option at this price point, but it's very niche and it's not even going to be the right option for everyone looking for an ultra wide lens. But at this size and price, it is definitely a cool option for someone just looking to try out shooting at ultra wide, maybe for the first time. It's also a really cool option for a just-in-case lens for if you happen upon that shot that you really want to have an ultra-wide focal length for, but you don't use it very often, so you don't want it to eat up a lot of the room in your camera bag or a lot of your budget. And it's also a pretty interesting option for someone to use because of its size and price, again, as a travel ultra wide option. But I think for anyone that's really looking to kind of expand the amount of budget prime lenses that they have in their kit, really both of these lenses are different but interesting options. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about these two lenses? Have you used one or both of these lenses? What did you think about the experience? Are you looking to get one or both of these lenses, and which one are you leaning towards and why? If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell icon so you can get notified of all the videos that I make here on this channel. If you are interested in purchasing either of these two lenses or any of the other camera gear that I've mentioned in this video, I will leave affiliate links in the description below. If you click and purchase through those links at no extra cost to you, it will help you support this channel so that I can continue making videos for you guys. Thanks, see ya.